Hi, this is Caroline from The Happy Sensitive, and I'm here with an audio on the difference between codependence and covert narcissism. So let me preface this by saying I did not start out when I started my blog and when I started, The Happy Sensitive, when I started working with clients. I never started out aiming to become knowledgeable on narcissism or help people with narcissism or any of that. But there's something about high sensitivity that gets confused with narcissism a lot. So over the years, I have had to educate myself on this, and I've had to ask myself time and time again, wait a minute, superficially, this person sounds like they're highly sensitive, and so I should be able to understand them, and I should be able to help them. But when I talk to them more deeply, the issues that are surfacing are not something that I recognize as high sensitivity. It's a different kind of problem that they're having. So that's where this audio comes from. Okay, so codependence and covert narcissism. Codependence is because, I want to talk about this because a lot of highly sensitive people are codependent. Now, codependence means that you put yourself last. You prioritize everyone else's needs and everyone else's pain. So you look around and you think, well, what I need is not important. What I want doesn't matter because that person is hurting. And that person clearly needs more help than I do. And that person their needs are more important. Their situation is worse. So you always have reasons why what you need is not important, but what other people need is more important. It needs to be prioritized. Somebody has to help them. That person has to be you. That's codependence. And codependence is a problem because you always end up being last. There's always somebody out there that you can compare yourself to and decide, oh, they need help more than I do. They need money more than I do. They need support more than I do. They need to be heard more than I do. So you end up putting yourself last, always. Every situation, and it never ends. That's codependence. Covert narcissism is different. But on the surface, it sounds similar because when somebody has covert narcissism, they're often very concerned with what other people think and feel. But this is the thing. They worry about what other people think and feel not because they are concerned for their well-being. No, they worry about what other people think and feel because they are worried about what that person will think of them. So I want to make sure that they think well of me. That's covert narcissism. So both in codependence and in covert narcissism, there's a lot of focus on the other person. But the difference is that in covert narcissism, it's all about, do they like me? Do they think well of me? How do people see me? And so in covert narcissism, there's a lot of trying to say the right thing that will please someone. Now this sounds like codependence, right? Because it sounds like I just want that person to feel good, but the intention is different. In codependence, the intention is I don't want other people to be hurting. I want them to do well. I want them to be happy. And I think that if they're happy and they're not hurting anymore, then we can all be happy together. That's kind of the dream of codependence. That's the underlying goal. That's the underlying strategy. It's like, they're hurting, and obviously that's not fun to be around, but if we just make their pain go away, then we can all be happy and we can all be together. Covert narcissism is different because it's not saying I want that person to be well, or I want that person to be well taken care of. Covert narcissism is I'm concerned about the effect that my words will have on their impression of me. Very different. So somebody who has a lot of covert narcissism will always try to figure out what is it that I need to say to be liked? What is it that I need to do for that person to see me in a good light? It's impression management. It's PR. So this is very different, right? Covert narcissism doesn't come from a deep, loving, caring about the other person. No, it comes from a fear that other people might judge you or they might not like you. It's really more about wanting to be liked. I want everyone to like me. Why? Well, because if one person doesn't like me, then I get insecure. To some extent, we all worry a little bit about what other people will think or say, right? We're all struggling a little bit from time to time with, if I do that or that, how will people respond? Of course, that's normal. This is about how much of it you're doing, right? Covert narcissism, everything becomes about that. Everything becomes about, I need to say this, I need to do that, I need to behave this way, otherwise people will not like me. And so then what happens is somebody becomes very inauthentic. Their social behavior becomes a show, a theater show. It becomes about managing other people's image. I can't say that because they won't like me. I can't do that because they won't think well of me. And then that also breeds a lot of anger and frustration, because now it's like when somebody is behaving this way, it's like they're trapped. They're trapped inside this requirement to be liked all the time. I have to do that, otherwise people don't like me. Yeah, so what? So they don't like you. Not everybody has to like you. If that is really hard for someone, if they're like, but I have to be liked by everyone, chances are that's covert narcissism. Because when someone is codependent, it's less about being liked and it's more about trying to support others. And when you're really trying to help someone, you're really trying to support them, you might tell them to do something that they don't want to do, right? If somebody is addicted, they're addicted to drugs or they're addicted to drink, and you stage an intervention, that person is not going to like you. They're not going to be happy that you stage an intervention, at least not in that moment. Maybe later they'll be glad, but in that moment, no. So a lot of caring behavior is not the same as doing the thing that will get you the most applause. Sometimes it is, but often it's not, right? So that's also where codependence and covert narcissism differ. The covert narcissism will tell people what they want to hear at all costs almost, even if that would be a terrible thing for that other person to do. But they're always in pleasing mode. I just want to please you. I just want to say what you want to hear. But we all know, telling people what they want to hear is not always what they need to hear. But if you're going to tell someone something that they don't want to hear, but you think it's really important, they're not going to like you in that moment. But if you really care for the person, if you really want them to be well, and I need to tell them this, I need to stage this intervention. Of course it's uncomfortable if they yell at you or they lash out, but then in your heart why you're doing this, because this is something they need to be well, right? So that's a very different way of operating from, I just want them to like me. This distinction is really important, because if somebody has an agenda where they just want to be liked, they might say, oh, I'm super compassionate and I really care about other people, but it's not actually caring. It's coming from a place of fear, a fear of, what will they think of me? And that fear is there because there's an inner conflict. There's often, when people have covert narcissism, they're often they, on the surface, they say, oh, that's great for you. That's so wonderful, because they want the other person to like them. But secretly, they might be jealous. They might be angry. They might think the person's doing something stupid. But they're never going to say that. So there's this split. There's this ever-growing split between what they really think and really feel versus what they're showing people. And that split breeds resentment. Now it's like, I'm stuck in this place where I have to do all these things because otherwise people don't like me, and it's so unfair because I can't be myself. But also, there's a fear of being themselves. Because being themselves means letting go of that image in their head that says, you can be perfect, you can be liked by everyone. Which is an insane image. It's an insane thing to strive for. You cannot truly be liked by everyone. That's insane. It's insane because there are so many different people out there. So many different kinds of ways of being in the world. It's impossible for everyone to like everyone. And that's okay. So the trouble with covert narcissism is that there's this running away from the self, the running away from what they're really thinking, really feeling, and also running away from accepting themselves as they are and getting to know themselves better, and where needed, learning better social skills, learning better self-care skills, learning better everything skills. And it just instead becomes this striving to get away from uncomfortable feelings and any discomfort at all. This is a really defining feature. Codependent people are constantly, so I'm switching on purpose here. Codependent people are constantly throwing themselves into very uncomfortable situations because they think, I need to go and help that person. Doesn't matter that I'm uncomfortable, doesn't matter that I'm hurting, I need to go and be there for them. Covert narcissists are constantly running away from uncomfortable situations because they think, I don't like it, I don't want it, and I just want to avoid this discomfort. And so they do that in social situations. They avoid saying anything that somebody might not like, but they also do it internally. They avoid dealing with the feelings and dealing with the experiences that make them uncomfortable. And once you start doing that, once you start operating that way, more and more things make you uncomfortable. Because you don't practice. You don't practice becoming comfortable with difficult things. You don't practice dealing with your feelings, so they make you more and more uncomfortable. And then that leads to a whole bunch of other resentment and anger and frustration and powerlessness and all kinds of things. Now, when I say codependent, a lot of people think, oh, but I'm not codependent because codependence sounds weak. Codependence sounds like somebody who's easily manipulated. But here's the inner story of people who have codependence. It doesn't say I'm weak. It doesn't say poor me. It says I am strong. I am capable. All these other people are hurting, but I can handle it. I can be there for them. I can take care of them. So codependence is kind of a getting stuck in life because you're trying to be too strong, actually, and you're avoiding all the vulnerable parts of yourself that are saying, we can't do this, it's too hard. You just keep going and you keep saying, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's hard for me. What matters is that other people are suffering and I need to be there for them. So it comes from a good place. It comes from really wanting the best for others, but it comes at a huge cost. And so eventually codependence leads to other problems. And it can also lead to other kind of coping mechanisms to try and balance out codependence. So covert narcissism and codependence can sometimes coexist, where on some level someone is codependent and coming from a good place, but then they exhaust themselves so much that this other part of them kicks in and is like me in some other way. It's not black or white. At some point, our psyches can get really complicated, and we can have these layers where one part of us goes that way, the other part goes that way. But the key is daring to look inside. And when somebody has mostly codependence, they're usually willing to face difficult things. It's just realizing like, oh, it makes more sense. It's more productive if I start facing my own difficult things. That's the turnaround for codependent people. Whereas the turnaround for covert narcissists is kind of getting out of this lazy emotional mindset, saying, I don't want to be uncomfortable, and realizing if you want to really live, if you want to be fully alive, if you want to really get things done in your life, you have to face uncomfortable feelings, and you have to get to know those feelings. You have to get to understand them. You have to learn to feel them. Because if you don't, if you keep running away from them, then what happens is you start blaming others for them, and you start misreading social situations. What narcissistic people do is when someone says or does something that makes them feel uncomfortable, they don't inquire into, what are these feelings that I'm having? What is up with me? Why am I feeling this way? No, it's very superficial. It's like, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Oh, that's not good. Don't want that. Wait, who made this happen? Whose fault is it? That person made me uncomfortable. And so narcissistic people get triggered very quickly. Now, if they're a covert narcissist, they might try to fix a situation by saying something to make the other person like them again. But also they'll conclude that if you say something to them that makes them feel bad, they'll conclude that you don't like them. Even if you're just being real with them about something. So covert narcissism, there's a lot of avoiding, but it's trying to avoid discomfort by always saying things that make them look good, that make them look nice, that make them look like a good person. So this is very important to covert narcissists. They will typically get very upset if you say something that to them suggests that they're not a good person. I am pretty sure that underneath this, audio video, there will be people who end up being offended or try to defend to me that something I've said, even though that's about them, that it's not about them, or doesn't mean what I said it means. And a lot of, that attitude, there's a lot of that now with, people getting offended really quickly. It's, at root, it's this inability to deal with their own feelings. Instead of saying, wow, this really triggered me, let me look inside and see what this is really about, they're like, I don't want to be uncomfortable, you made me uncomfortable, it's your fault. You did something wrong to make me feel this way. That's a very deep lack of emotional understanding about how emotions work. And that is very different from being highly sensitive. So these differences matter because, interestingly enough, often it's the codependent people who are very worried about being narcissistic. They're constantly thinking, maybe I'm the narcissist, maybe I'm the narcissist, maybe I'm the narcissist, oh my God, maybe I'm the narcissist. And so codependent people will try everything they can to avoid doing anything that could potentially be seen as selfish. And that is pretty much the definition of codependence. Codependence is when you try to avoid doing anything that may seem selfish to others at all costs. Because you're worried that making it about you at any time is just hugely wrong. Because other people's needs and pain is more important. Always. No matter what they're going through. If someone stubbed their toe because they were trying to get some food at McDonald's and they tripped, that is their hurt and they're upset about that is more important than you having to go for a scary hospital scan because you don't know there might be some problem with your health and you don't know what's going to happen and you're freaked out about it. Doesn't matter. Them stubbing their toe is more important. In codependence, there's almost like this inability to put things in perspective and say, hey, they're making a big fuss about their stubbed toe, but I'm actually having to go into the hospital for a really scary check today. So I think today I'm a little bit more important. I think today I'm going to make it about me. I'm going to ignore the toe hurt of them just for a bit, because I don't think it's quite in the same level of intensity. No, in codependence, it's like you don't see that. You just see they're hurting. The fact that somebody else other than you is hurting is always more important. Whereas narcissism is, it doesn't matter what the situation is, my pain is always more important. And my discomfort is always more important. If I'm slightly uncomfortable, that is always more important than somebody else having big, huge, real pain. See, so they're like polar opposites in a way, but superficially there's some characteristics that look very similar or even the same, and so they get confused a lot. Okay, so what is the turnaround? Well, codependent people need to stop avoiding selfishness and bring themselves back to a healthy middle. But often, if you're codependent, you don't know what that is. You have no reference frame. You have no idea what a healthy middle even looks like. You have no idea how to find it. You have no idea how to stay in it because you're so conditioned to always worry about other people's pain and what they're going through, and that's more important. A lot of codependent people, maybe even all of them, became this way because they grew up with narcissistic people. Narcissistic people who make a big fuss about being a little bit uncomfortable. And then the pattern continues and goes on 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 until you start to see, wait a minute, this is, I thought they were really hurting and it was more important and I thought I didn't matter, but maybe that's not true. And then that turnaround, it's actually not just a rational decision. It's not just a flip, like a switch that you can flip. There actually is real work that goes into getting out of that codependence one step at a time, because you have so much conditioning, so many inner mechanisms that have made your system adapt to sacrificing yourself. It's automatic, because when you grow up in a certain way, our bodies are very efficient. And if you have to do the same thing over and over and over to fit in and to try and make things work in your family, then your body starts to automate those things, starts to automate those behavior patterns, starts to automate those thinking patterns and those feelings until it becomes something that is almost like a prison. And I know this is really hard, and this is hard to get out of, but it's possible. It's possible to get out of it, but it's really important to understand that talking about it is only the first step. Because at some point you realize that even if you can name it, even if you rationally understand what's going on, you're still stuck in these automatic behaviors and these feelings that compel you to behave the old way. So that's where deeper work is really helpful. And I've had to do a lot of this deeper work. I understand what codependence is like. I understand that you don't think you're codependent. It doesn't feel like you're codependent. You definitely don't feel weak or anything. You don't feel manipulated, even though technically other people are constantly manipulating you with this perception that their pain is bigger than yours. Not everybody will do this, but there are a lot of people who will use you in that way, because you're so quick to make them more important than you are. So like, but I stubbed my toe and I'm so horrified. Oh, now it's all about you. I'm so sorry. How can I help you? So there are ways to get out of it, but it takes a very specific kind of inner work. It's very worth it. But it's a kind of work where step by step you start to rebuild and break down the old ways and build new ways, and get very honest and clear with yourself one little step at a time, because you can't do that in one go. You can't be like, well, today I'm going to be 100% honest with myself and clear about what's going on with me. No, you do it one little step at a time, and from there you get new insights, new information. If you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I think I need to do that work, but I don't know how, I have a program for this specifically that I built because this is such a huge problem, and therapy only gets you so far. So this program is called No to Narcissist. You can find it on my website. If you go to thehappysensitive.com/coaching, you'll find it listed there. So if you're struggling, you're like, oh darn, I just automatically worry and put all my effort into helping others at the cost of helping myself all the time, constantly, this is worth looking into. Now, for the people who are covert narcissists, that is not really my specialty to help with. I will have a conversation with somebody if this is what's happening for them. I'll have a conversation with them, but with covert narcissism, there's really there is a mindset shift that needs to happen, and a lot of people who are stuck in narcissism will never make that shift. They will just refuse, and they will keep complaining about how their life is not working, but they refuse to make the shift. And the shift is, if you try to keep your life comfortable at all costs, you're going to stay stuck. You have to learn to deal with uncomfortable realities and uncomfortable feelings. You have to get out of that mindset where you think you can have the perfect life, and you think that you can get to a place where everyone will like you and all discomfort goes away. It's just, narcissism is just massive avoidance. Avoiding feelings, avoiding dealing with things, avoiding discomfort. And then this idea like, I should not have to be uncomfortable. Like you're some kind of prince or princess, No, we all have to be uncomfortable. That's part of life, right? It's like, we don't get to choose that. You're going to be uncomfortable much of the time if you're being real with life. But you can get better at handling discomfort, so it's not such a big deal anymore. That's the thing. Last point on covert narcissism versus overt narcissism, because I think this can be confusing, but they're very similar. It's just that with covert narcissism, somebody is hiding the part of themselves that is like, oh, you suck. And it's just instead focused on, I need their approval at all costs to make myself feel better. So what do I need to say to get their approval? Whereas overt narcissism is dealing with discomfort in a different way. It's saying, if I feel uncomfortable because of what somebody does or wants from me or says, then that is their fault, but I don't have to get their approval. I can just reject them. So I can just say, you're stupid, you suck, you're only saying that because you're jealous, you're only saying that because you're wrong, you're only saying that. But so overt narcissism is much more about rejecting people in order to cope with feelings of discomfort. Whereas covert narcissism is trying to deal with that discomfort by trying to make the other people basically take back whatever opinion or thing and like less than perfect opinion that they might have of you. It's like, oh, what do I need to do to get back in their good graces at all costs, right? And not saying anything that might upset that precious balance. So like I said, that's very different from caring about the other person's feelings or caring about how the other person is doing. When you really care about someone, you may actually do things that make that person uncomfortable because you truly want to help them. You truly want to support them. And not in a kind of, I care for you, therefore you have to do what I want. No, that's narcissism. But it's really making an effort to see things from the other person's perspective. Why are they struggling? Why are they hurting? Why are they stuck? Why are things so hard for them? But when you do too much of that, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, you can end up not seeing your own perspective anymore. You know, you start listening to the reasons why somebody did something hurtful and something painful, why they're lashing out, why they're being mean, but you're like trying to understand it from their perspective. And then when you do understand it from their perspective as best as you can, suddenly it's like your own perspective gets erased. That's what happens in codependence. So it's, you know, using that ability to emphasize, sorry, I can't even say it, that empathy, using that empathy in a different way, learning to also apply it to yourself and not just other people. Whereas narcissism is running away from feelings of discomfort and feelings of shame and worthlessness and rejection, and not wanting to deal with that at all, and trying to run from it by creating this fantasy perfection thing where I can be a perfect person, everything will be perfect, everything has to be perfect, my life has to be perfect, that kind of fantasy, and then trying to maintain that, trying to do PR for it all the time. So these are very different. And if you're dealing with somebody who is trying to defend, you know, their perfect lifestyle and their perfect sense of self, you don't have to do much to offend them. The smallest thing can set them off, because the smallest thing is like, oh, the emperor has no clothes, you know? And that's how codependence and covert narcissism are very and importantly different. All right, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.